Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon session. My name is Lee Crawford. I'm the presiding officer for this session. We have some terrific presentations for you this afternoon, so let's get right to it. Our first presentation is about the use of an outside employment consultant, and we're very fortunate to have with us DeDe Church, who is the founder and owner of DeDe Church and Associates, an experienced employment law attorney, and has been working in the consulting field for almost a quarter century. She's a very popular speaker. I know you'll enjoy the presentation. So DeDe, with that, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Lee. Hi, everyone. I hope you're all doing well. I think you're probably like me and have realized there are some things about this pandemic that are actually okay. I like the slower pace. I like the bonus time with my kids, including one who's a senior in high school. Like you, I've almost finished Netflix. So there are some good things, but today is one of those days that makes it really hard because I love this conference. And I'm sad not to be able to see each of your faces and talk with you all. I think the Labor and Employment Bar is just really filled with special and unique people and friends. So just know that I'm grateful, so grateful to be here, but I do wish we were in person. When V&A kindly asked me to give the lunchtime talk, I got excited because lunchtime talks are the best. Everyone's snacking and feeling good. So I hope that you have a snack or lunch. Feel free to chew away. And we're going to just talk about a somewhat light topic, but also there is some meat in this. Choosing an outside consultant, if you've done it, can be tricky. So I hope that I can offer you some guidance as we go. But because I'm the lunchtime speaker, we have to start off, of course, with a little warm-up game. Now, I want you, if you would, to take a moment, and when I'm going to put something up on the screen, I want you to look at it and just read it out loud very quickly, all right? Just read it out loud to yourself. It's okay. Nobody is going to hear you. Ready? I'm going to put it up. 1, 2, 3, go. Did you say Paris in the spring? Because if you did, let's look together again, slowly. The first word is Paris, in, and then look, the spring. See it now? There is a little second V in there that really jumps out at you when you take the time to look. And I love this. It's a metaphor. It's a game that I use all the time because I think that as we are in our professions for a while, our brains sometimes start to get ahead of us. And I'm including myself in that, by the way. And we start to assume we know what someone's going to say or how things are going to turn out. So this is just a fun little reminder, especially if you work in the field where I spend a lot of time, which is in employee investigations. It's critical that we slow our brains down and really listen. Speaking of listening, in case you didn't get that challenge correct, I'm going to give you another chance, okay? All you have to do for me right now is spell out loud the word silk, okay? Like the fabric. Ready? Here we go. Do it with me. S-I-L-K. Look at you. You got it, all right? Silk. That's exactly right. Silk. S-I-L-K. And cows drink. Did you say milk? Because actually cows drink water. Okay, so that's another little game that I love. I want to tell you that I use this all the time, and occasionally, and I'm not drawing any stereotypes here, but it is usually a male, wink, who will say to me, "Nah, baby cows drink milk," and there'll be a little pushback on that. So, okay, I accept that, but this is just a little game to remind us again about listening, really actively listening. I learned a long time ago before my very first deposition that after a depo or a witness interview, you should be utterly exhausted because your active listening skills should be so highly engaged. And I think that's about right. So we're going to talk about consultants. That's all. I promise I won't make you do any more games this morning, but feel free to try this out on your family because they're actually kind of fun. There's so much talk about consultancy. And actually, when, again, V&A asked me to do this talk, we had no idea that so many of our colleagues were going to be facing furloughs or facing the loss of opportunities. I am seeing a lot, for example, in my LinkedIn feed, that's pretty much a kick in the gut how many people have lost their positions. So I do think more and more of us are considering going into being a consultant. And so this actually ends up being more timely, perhaps, than we would have liked. This slide is just funny. I don't care for the word consultant, and that's probably my own bias, but there's all kinds of jokes about consultants. You might be a consultant if instead of the daily specials, you ask the waiter about the restaurant's core competencies. You tell your children that their problems are actually improvement opportunities. I actually kind of do that. You ask your credit card companies to refer to you as highly leveraged as opposed to in debt or broke. And lastly, you can spell paradigm, and you actually know what a paradigm is. I have a friend who is an MBA, and he loves MBA speak. And I often have to slow him down and say, can you tell me what you just told me in normal language? And paradigm is one of his favorite words. So that's just kind of some fun stuff to get us started as we think about the jokes about being a consultant. That's why actually I named my company DeDe Church and Associates. I know it's not very creative, but I didn't really want the word consultant in the name. That said, that's again my own bias. Legal consultants are really in high demand. And just so that we're all on the same page, I'll put this up so we can talk about it. So a legal consultant is usually a project-based lawyer who's specialized in something that's in high demand. Absolutely discovery and litigation, lately healthcare, really healthcare. Compliance issue, I just saw that OSHA is really gonna start enforcing some organizations' response to the pandemic. If you're a compliance expert, this is probably a great time for you. IT work and data privacy, that's always in high demand. Oftentimes people will reach out to a legal consultant if they're having a peak workload, if they're being sued, if they are being audited, if something's going on in the life of a corporation and they have a short-term but critical need. And then the third thing from the bottom, often engaged by small and medium-sized businesses. And we see this a lot. Organizations that might not be able to afford full-time counsel and honestly may not need full-time counsel, but they do need somebody on the phone, somebody that they can call routinely when something comes up. So that's what we think of as a legal consultant. Just so you know, my team is 7 lawyers and 1 PhD. And this is what we do. We call it employee relations or human resources consulting. We're, 7 of us are licensed attorneys, but we've chosen instead of litigation to focus on trying to keep our clients out of the courtroom. I started my career as an assistant attorney general, and I litigated for 7 years. I was incredibly fortunate by the age of 28 to have argued before the Texas Supreme Court and to have argued before the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals 4 or 5 times. And I was board certified in civil trial by the Texas Board of Legal Specialization. I thought I was going to be a litigator. And then as I got older, I realized that a lot of the trials I was having could have and probably should have been resolved at an earlier time, and that kind of wore on me. And I just had a moment where I thought what I'd really like to spend my career doing is making the workplace better. I know that sounds super cliche, but that is the truth. And the people on my team have migrated to my team because they actually feel the same way. So we are retained by Fortune 50 companies and mom and pop shops and a lot of state agencies, of course, because I'm still an assistant attorney general in my heart and love public entities. We do a lot of investigations into employee concerns. We do a lot of training, not lately, mind you, but typically we do a lot of training. We do a lot of executive coaching, which we are doing a lot of now over Zoom. I'm lucky enough to have the former director of the Southwest region of the OFCCP on my team, and she helps our clients with their affirmative action plans. We do climate surveys and strategic planning. Our PhD does that. So just so you know, this is if you're thinking about putting together a group of consultants, this is an example of how that might work. Finding people who are have skill sets that fit nicely together And I'm super grateful for my team. We've been lucky enough to be successful, and more importantly, we really like each other. And I think that is pretty significant. So let's imagine now that you are trying to decide whether to bring in a consultant specifically for an investigation. So you could probably use this line of reasoning for any legal consultant, but I just wanted to bring it home. So if you're trying to decide on whether to handle, let's say you have an employee complaint of sexual harassment, for example, and you're trying to decide, all right, do we want to handle this inside? Do we have the resources inside, or should we send this out to an external investigator? Some of the things you want to consider include cost, of course. How much is it going to cost? Well, I'll tell you that for our team, we charge between $360 and $370 an hour. And for a run-of-the-mill, I mean, there are no run-of-the-mill, but for a fairly low-intensity sexual harassment investigation, it'll probably cost you ballpark like $7,500. That's a pretty good average for us. But so you think, oh, I don't know if we have that budgeted. On the other hand, if you try to do it internally and it doesn't go well, or perhaps you don't have someone on your team who's experienced enough, it can end up costing you easily 10 to 12 times that as you go forward. One of the things we like to do is if a client says, hey, we've got this new HR person, we think he or she is great, they've done a lot of investigations, we're happy to team up with them for 1 or 2 investigations. We share our forms, of course, and you want that in an external consultant, somebody who kind of sees themselves on your team. That's important. So cost would be one consideration. You have to think about the trust on your team. So we just got a call yesterday from a wonderful organization to help with an investigation because their internal team, who is crazy experienced and really good, just had to furlough a lot of the people in the team where the complaint has surfaced. And they are concerned that those people don't have a lot of trust for HR. The furloughs, like most, were problematic. And so you have to consider, you want the people involved in the scenario that you're investigating to trust that the investigation is being done well and is neutral. And so if you don't have that trust, it's a problem. Closely related is bias. Sometimes just bringing in an outsider who has fresh ears and fresh eyes can really alleviate concerns of bias, especially, again, if your own internal HR investigator has been involved, say, with disciplinary action or someone involved in the matter. You do want someone with experience. I cannot stress this enough. It's the things that I see now that I'm 52 and have been doing this a long time, I experience them differently. When I'm in an interview, a witness interview, for example, I think I'm hearing things through better ears. I think that we've all come to have a better understanding of people's agendas and of how people respond to trauma. And all of those things go into experience. And if you have somebody who's never done this before and they're a little too anxious to make a finding, for example, that also can cost you. The respondent's rank is critical. If you have a complaint against someone who's very high level in your company, I think it's just incredibly unfair, frankly, to ask an HR person to handle that investigation. It's putting them at a real disadvantage and expecting them to interview and ask usually hard questions of someone who's significantly higher than them in the organization. That feels unfair and untenable. And then finally, you want to think about the severity. Are you expecting litigation? Because if you are, it's really nice to have an external investigator that you can call as a witness. In fact, we tell our clients to always assume the investigator is going to be called to the witness stand. And frankly, we often are. So that's in a lot of cases where we are called to the witness stand, we're the first witness. They want the jury to see, hey, we already brought in a neutral party who came in and this is what they said and this is how we responded. So all of those things, I think, kind of go into your decision about whether or not to bring in an external investigator. What are you looking for? Well, we already talked about some of this. You definitely want experience, but more and more, I think you want empathy. One of the qualities that I really appreciate in my teammates is that through an investigation, even if we don't end up finding for the complainant, you want that person to feel heard, right? So I think empathy is really important. Now, not so much empathy that your investigator says, gosh darn, I'm so sorry that happened to you and we're gonna get that guy. Not that, but able to really make that person feel heard and feel understood and spend the time. That's really what you're looking for in an investigator. As well as some persistence. You want someone who is not just going to hear a respondent deny having an untenable relationship with a subordinate and move on. You want someone who's going to listen to that person deny the relationship and then go through the texts, go through the receipts, really piece together their travel calendars and figure out, no, there is definitely something here. Persistence is good. Crawling outside of the scope is not good. You're hiring an external person to come in and do a finite job. We're not looking for someone who sees themselves as an expert in all aspects of your business, or who decides to look into every issue that grows legs. And in every investigation, they do grow legs. So you want someone who you can trust to stay within scope, and you want someone who can make a decision. This is my own pet peeve. I'll share it with you. I'm not a fan of investigations that come back with a finding of unable to substantiate or not substantiate. We don't do that. It's unhelpful to the team that's been investigated. It doesn't allow them to move on. It's I think it's a cop-out, frankly. So what I would suggest for you is, if you hire an investigator and they come back to you and say, I just don't know if this happened or not, well, then encourage them to say the complaint is not substantiated. If you don't have enough to say that it happened, then you say that it didn't happen. But what I like to do is say, at this time, we are unable to substantiate the concern. And all the parties are welcome to come back if additional information is discovered or found. But I really, you want to talk to your investigator about their ability to make a finding. If you hire the wrong person, what can happen? Well, quite a bit, actually. They can get in there and stir up a whole bunch of controversy unnecessarily. If it's a person who gives away too much information, an investigator obviously wants to strike rapport, right, with witnesses. But if they give away too much information in that rapport stage, the gossip mill, as you know, takes off. And a lot of things get stirred up that don't necessarily need to be. If you have an investigator who insists on talking to your vendors or even former employees or clients, they can accidentally get out there and educate them about internal problems. And that can, of course, have severe consequences on your bottom line and your relationship with outsiders. This just happened, so I'm aware of this. They can also end up educating an executive about a pending complaint at the wrong time. What I'm thinking of was a matter where an executive was braced to separate a VP, a high-level person. The executive was working on the separation, was thinking about it, was documenting it. Meanwhile, that executive filed a complaint against, the VP filed a complaint against the executive. And the investigator on this matter had the wherewithal to ask the client, wait, before I start this investigation, has anyone told the executive about the complaint? And they said no. The investigator had the wisdom to say, well, then let's put this on hold, let the executive make the decision about whether or not the VP needs to be separated, and let the executive make that decision without any knowledge of the complaint. And that will dilute any complaint of retaliation later. And it did, and that ended up being some wisdom that really helped out the company. You want an investigator who can use the complainant's words directly and exactly. A lot of complainants can clearly say, this is what happened, this is how it made me feel. They may not know the legal terms, for example, hostile environment. So you really don't want an investigator to teach them those words, because that's not the investigator's job, right? It's the investigator's job to listen and look into things, but not to necessarily give them an education on how they need to be phrasing their complaint. And finally, you don't want an investigator who's going to give you a written report that has all kinds of damaging information in it. You want to bring in an outsider who's written reports before and understands that juries might be seeing those reports, and they need to be limited to the scope. All right, so how do you find that person, you might be asking? Well, I put together this document some time ago for a client, and I share it all the time. It's going to be on your screen, but if you prefer to have it in an actual piece of paper or PDF, please let me know. I'm happy to share it with you. But these are what I think of as good questions to ask. When you call up an investigator, ask something like these things. First, just get them to describe their overall approach, whatever it is, and just, again, use your active listening skills. Hopefully you're going to hear something like, we want to get in there, we want to be thorough, but we don't want to cause any unnecessary disruption. We don't want to go looking for problems that aren't there. We don't want to, we're going to stay in touch with you as we go forward. Ask, will your findings include a policy violation, a legal violation, or will they only substantiate or not substantiate the allegation? In most cases, you want it to be the latter. It's never helpful to have your investigator draw a legal conclusion. That's something for your in-house counsel or your external counsel, but not for your investigator, who is primarily a fact finder. So in some cases, the client, you might want your investigator to decide whether or not a policy has been violated, and that's fine. In my experience, that's fine. But the legal violation is going too far. And if you have an investigator who says they will make that kind of finding, you might want to explore further. How will you handle scope creep? We've already talked about this. Make sure that they understand they're going to check back with you before they start bringing in new witnesses that haven't been discussed or pursuing new allegations. Do you record the interviews? And this is something that I think is becoming more and more important for you to discuss before bringing in an external consultant. Obviously, you're going to want to keep with your company policy, but because now we're doing a lot of interviews through Zoom or other remote technology, this becomes even more important because anybody on the call could record it. So this needs to be a discussion about, are we going to record these things? And if you are going to record it, have a discussion about who maintains it, who has access, those kinds of things. Just a few more questions you may want to ask someone. Do you keep notes of your conversations with counsel? Preferably not. Do you read your notes back to witnesses before they leave the interview to ensure accuracy? That's, I think, the best practice. So take notes by hand or on a tablet, whatever your technique is. And then before the witness leaves, just read them back quickly. A lot of times that encourages the witness to mention things that they may have forgotten earlier, or to correct something that you've accidentally written down incorrectly. And if you are a public agency, always, always talk to anybody external that you bring in about their comfort level with the Public Information Act. Do they know that what they're creating is basically an open record? A few more. Ask them how they talk with witnesses about retaliation and confidentiality. You want someone who understands the latest NLRB ruling, which, as you guys know, says that we can now ask for confidentiality while the investigation is pending. And I do think that's important, and I do think it's important that you ensure your external investigator has a copy of your anti-retaliation policy so that if asked, they can easily ship that. Do you make recommendations? Again, this is a personal preference, but I think you ought to not want a recommendation in your investigation report. It's a fact-finding document. if your investigator goes so far as to make a recommendation and then you don't do exactly what that person recommends, let's say they recommend termination and you're like, oh, I don't think we're going to do that. It kind of undermines everything else in the report if you don't do what they say. So my preference is that you find someone who would, if you feel like you need a recommendation, let's have that done in a different forum, not in this document. And then lastly, as we talked about, so many investigators, of course, end up testifying. So you want to make sure that they would be comfortable if that ends up being necessary. Okay, that is it for that part of my talk, which is things to think about if you're going to bring in an external consultant or an external investigator. We're going to shift gears now to a topic that I have never been asked to talk about before, and that is, should you become a consultant? This is fascinating. I've really enjoyed giving this thought and thinking about what it means to be an external consultant and how any knowledge that I might have could possibly be helpful to some of you who, again, may be facing a loss of a current job or just a transition in your lives. I have talked to a lot of friends who feel like this pandemic is a big reminder that we need to be more thoughtful and more cautious with how we spend our time. And I know a lot of people who feel like the running of the rat race, running on the wheel, that's not going to fly anymore. And that we've spent these past few weeks, months now, realizing that. And so this is weirdly a pretty timely topic, I think. So what does it mean to be a consultant? Well, does it mean on the beach? No, but I do love this picture. No, it doesn't. There are definitely days where I'm so glad that I don't have to report into someone. Of course, I'm responsible to my teammates, but there are definitely days where it does feel like this. And there are also days where it feels like this and that this person is totally untethered. If you look at the picture, like there's no one around, nothing's plugged in, there's nobody for this person to reach out to for help. And yeah, that happens too. So there is a lot to think about. So while this picture may not happen much, this one happens all the time. This is my team minus one person who couldn't be with us. And I put this in there to show you that the benefits of consulting include being able to spend your time with people who matter, people who you care about, you actually legitimately care about, and who care about you. So if we broke that down, some of the benefits of being a consultant include job security. I know this is kind of a double-edged sword. What I mean is you're not going to get a pink slip. You're not going to spend any time wondering if you're going to get fired or separated or demoted. That's not going to happen. There is some lack of security in, of course, you have to have jobs. You have to have contracts with clients. And if you don't have that, then it probably does feel a little bit less secure. But there is something to be said for not being reliant on an organization for your you also have client preference. This is a little bit sticky, but if you take a job with someone and it doesn't go well, or you find yourself feeling stress or a difference in approach, guess what? You don't have to work with that person again. And this doesn't happen very often, luckily for us, but it does occasionally happen. And having control over who you work for is pretty powerful and goes a long way toward, I think, ensuring your happiness in your position. You definitely have flexibility. I can't say that enough. This is probably the number one thing. If you decide you want to, go with your family on vacation, remember when we used to do that? If you decide you want to go on vacation, you certainly can. You have total control of your calendar, assuming you haven't made a commitment already to the client. And that flexibility is huge. You also have diversity. I can tell you that if you throw your hat into this ring and decide to step away from the structure of an organization, you will probably end up doing something different every day. And that's really important. It's if you're a creative person, this will stoke your creativity. It's really nice to be exposed to different tasks all the time, because you're probably working for yourself, so you're doing a little bit of everything. And finally, personal mission. This has been the most rewarding part of being a consultant for me. If you've ever, I don't know why you would, but if you've ever gone to my website, you see that we give away 3% of every invoice to nonprofits that mean something to me and to our team. And I wouldn't be able to do that in a corporate role. So if there's something that you feel strongly about, a personal mission, then I would encourage you to factor that into how you structure your company, how you structure how you're going to be spending your day. Take advantage of that, because that's extremely rewarding. So now the negatives. I just happened to see this Dogbert comic strip. I like to con people and I like to insult people. If you combine con and insult, you get consult. So I'm here to consult you. And then the boss, of course, says it sounds expensive and demeaning. Okay. So that is just sort of a nice way that we step now into the downside of starting your own consulting practice. There is some hard stuff, of course. You're doing it all at your own risk. I mean, your own risk. When you start to put yourself out there, there's nobody who's going to catch you when you fall or when you make a mistake. For a lot of people, there is, at least at the beginning, a pretty huge drop in income, especially if you're stepping out of a biweekly paycheck, for example. That is definitely not how consulting works. So you have to be prepared for that, at least initial drop in income. There is isolation, although look at you, you're already practicing this. So look at you, you're already ready. There is some isolation involved. When I first went into being a consultant, I had been an assistant attorney general for over 7 years. So I had this wonderful community. I had people to sit around with and talk about the game last night or whatever might be going on. That takes a while to get used to, letting go of that. It's just a different feel. Hopefully, if you decide to go this route, you will make some friends or some colleagues who have their own consulting practices or are doing something similar, so you have somebody to bounce ideas off of. In the beginning, there's so many questions. What kind of insurance do I need? What kind of contract would I use? All those things, when you don't have anybody to brainstorm with, can be not only isolating, but frankly, a little bit terrifying. And so it's nice if you can put together a support group. Imposter syndrome, yes. So when you start off, you want to say yes to everything, right? One thing, you want money to start coming in. And so people will reach out to you and say, hey, can you do this? And your instinct is to say, yes, I can. And then as soon as you hang up, you're like, oh, can I do that? Gosh, a couple of decades ago, probably, I got asked to teach my first diversity and inclusion class as a training class. And I said yes, and then hung up and panicked and thought, who am I, right, to teach this? It was a terrible experience, but it did bring me to hours and hours of research and conferences and really immersing myself in that topic. And now it's my absolute favorite thing to teach diversity or implicit bias training. I love it. And it's come to mean so much to me. And that is not the case when I first started. So you will have imposter syndrome, but it might lead you to find out something about yourself that you otherwise wouldn't have. If you have a current title, if you are Assistant General Counsel or Assistant VP or Assistant Attorney General, letting that go can be harder than you think. I actually really missed that. And if I'm being totally honest, I still have one of my old Assistant AG cards pinned on my bulletin board behind my screen. Yeah, we're human. I missed it. I still miss it. So a loss of legal practice, I would want you to consider this. This is actually kind of big. For me, the vast majority of my clients come from referrals, frankly, from many of you. I'm so honored for the people that are attending this conference. It never goes away, that feeling of gratitude when you get a call from a lawyer you respect who is trusting you to take their client and do this one small thing and then give that client back, right? And so I can't practice law anymore, or I can't really, in all honesty, ask for you guys, the employment bar, to trust me. I can't ask that. So I gave up my legal practice so that I could honestly say, give me your client and I will take good care of them, and then I will give them all right back. And that's how that works. And then finally, there's really no roadmap. You're just, again, figuring it out as you go. You might end up putting yourself out there as one thing and then have it go a completely different direction, which for some of us, that's kind of the fun part too. There is some potential liability, throwing this out there. You want to be cautious about your contract. The standard is just a straight negligence standard. So you want to be sure that when you decide what your duty is to your client and how you lay that out in an engagement letter, you want to be very careful. I pulled a couple of cases. There were more. I just thought these were interesting. This was a safety consultant. This is from California, who came in and told them that he was going to make, or it said this company would make HR mobile services a safer place to work. And unfortunately, after they made changes, one of the workers suffered a fatal injury. And they came to realize that this consultant actually did not know what they were doing. And so the court found them negligent. And then this one from Florida, this is Health Integrated, which is a really large healthcare company outside of Tampa. They hired this group from Canada, and it's not funny, but it's kind of funny. The Canadian consultant said, hey, we know how to do some cost savings measures for you, and we can save you $2.5 million. Now you're going to have to pay us $1 million. And for whatever reason, the group agreed. And then what happened was the Canadian organization identified all these ways to cut costs, but they were severe. And so Health Integrated lost all their clients and ended up almost going out of business. When they looked into it, it turns out the Canadian company had absolutely no experience with managed healthcare and really didn't know what they were doing. So just 2 reminders that you do need to know what you're doing. In fact, figure out your area of expertise. Make sure you have experience, and make sure there's a demand for what you are bringing, for what your point of view is. You want to find clients, identify who that ideal client might be. Do you want to work for Halliburton, or do you want to work for the Dallas Mavericks? You know, what's your goal? And then try to figure out an outreach strategy that would differentiate yourself from your competition. And then as part of your strategy, be sure to put yourself out there. I've been incredibly lucky to speak at conferences like this, and I can't tell you how meaningful that's been to me, the relationships that I've made, and also the way that it's enabled me to meet future clients. So figure out a way, get involved with your local bar, for example, or figure out some way to put yourself out there. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. In fact, my time is almost up, but I know you want to know about money because that's what we're doing, right? It's work. I think I already mentioned we charge somewhere around $370 an hour. So you can kind of figure that out. I definitely, at this point in my career, make more than I did as a litigator. I'm just going to say this. So when I first started consulting, I worked for another consulting company, and they paid their consultants 30% of the contract, and they kept 70%. And I guess that's standard. It bothered me, though, because the company wasn't actually doing any of the work. So on my team, I'm lucky enough to be able to have total transparency. So everybody knows what the contract is. Everybody gets a copy of the contract with the engagement letter. and they get 60% for sure. And if it's a client they bring in, they get 70%. All of us work from home, so we have literally very low overhead. In fact, now that no one uses business cards, we pretty much have no overhead. And so we're able to send those, I'm able to give the money to the people who deserve it, which are my colleagues, for whom I'm really grateful. So I don't know if that's too detailed or too personal, but if you're going to go and work for another consulting group, give thought to that. Give thought to the percentage of the time that you're going to be investing in the job and how you're going to be rewarded for that. In conclusion, you guys ever seen this GIF? I love it. Just to wrap up, if you have any questions, send them in, and I'm about to ask Elizabeth if we have any questions, but before that, I'm just so grateful for your time today. I know this was kind of an unusual topic, and if it doesn't apply to you at all, I'm grateful for your patience. And if it does apply, I hope it helped in some way. Of course, I am always happy to be a resource for you guys, and if I can ever help, don't hesitate